week's topics build on what you examined in week 5. This week, you'll explore how the sponsor pharmaceutical company presents cumulative safety risks in the clinical regulatory documents prepared for a marketing application. This is a huge task, taking major efforts by lots of people working many long hours over several months. This week, in this lecture, we'll go over the safety data flow during development, the sections that discuss safety risks in a clinical study report, the integrated summary of safety in a marketing application, and also we'll discuss when an FDA advisory committee is convened and what its purpose is, as this will relate to the assignment that is due at the end of this week. And also, we'll end with what you should get out of this week and things to think about. As a brief recap, both non-clinical and clinical safety risks from studies conducted in an investigational products development program, as well as from published reports on the investigational product published in the literature, contribute to updating the product safety profile. The sponsor pharmaceutical company enlists various stakeholders to assess the accumulating safety data. Safety risk evaluations include assessing the updated, most current safety profile to evaluate and identify any new safety signals and explore the extent of risk associated with known and newly identified safety signals. European Medicines Agency defines safety signal this way. A safety signal is information on a new or known adverse event that is potentially caused by a medicine and that warrants further investigation. Signals are generated from several sources such as spontaneous reports, clinical studies, and the scientific literature. Pharmaceutical companies typically employ safety signal detection software to evaluate, maintain, and analyze the large amounts of safety data generated during the development of a new product. Now we'll turn to the clinical study report. And also in the appendices are patient listings for every patient. So the CSR, which I'll refer to as the clinical study report, contains all information related to how each clinical study was conducted and includes all efficacy and safety data. All CSRs are included within a marketing application. Here's a snapshot of the CSR safety sections for your easy reference. And these come from ICH E3, which is the content and structure of the clinical study report, and there is a recent addendum in 2012. Safety data are presented to support all study objectives related to safety in a protocol, just as efficacy discussions are geared to support the protocol objectives and endpoints related to efficacy. Section 12.1. Extent of exposure describes the number of subjects who received one or more doses of the investigational product, as well as the duration of the exposure, that is, how long each subject was on drug. Any unexpected results, for example, dosing interruptions, are also explained in the CSR. Any overdoses should also be mentioned and further described in the adverse events section. A discussion of any wrong doses administered is required, and this should also be discussed in the section on protocol deviations. In section 12.2.1, brief summary of adverse events, provides a brief, high-level summary paragraph on how many subjects had how many adverse events. Included are brief discussions on what the most frequent events were and whether there were any deaths, serious adverse events, or discontinuations due to adverse events. The more in-depth safety risk discussions occur in later sections. Section 12.2.1 is typically copied verbatim into the CSR synopsis and/or safety conclusions. ICH E3 also suggests that Section 12.2.3, Analysis of Adverse Events, is for relevant discussions on the analysis of adverse events, such as discussions on adverse events occurring during the treatment phase of a protocol, including but not limited to the most frequently reported adverse events, comparisons of adverse events across treatment groups, and whether there were any dose-related trends in type or frequency of the adverse events. Section 12.3.1, Listing of Deaths, Other Serious Adverse Events, and Other Significant Adverse Events, is often just a cross-reference to the section and/or appendix where these data are listed. Section 12.2.1.3, Other Significant AEs, usually include those adverse events that resulted in patient discontinuations from the study and/or study drug. Meaning they withdrew from the study or they just went off study drug. Sponsors may identify other adverse events of special interest in the CSR based on the indication being studied, the class of drug, and/or the mechanism of action of the drug as some example reasons to connote certain adverse events of special interest. For example, if there's a protocol that was evaluating a new investigational product for osteoporosis, but the fractures were not considered an endpoint. Therefore, if a patient got a fracture, that could be considered an AE. This might be an AE of special interest for that particular protocol. Under Section 12.3.2, Narratives of Deaths, Other SAEs, Serious Adverse Events, and Certain Other Significant AEs, ICH E3 states this section should include brief narratives describing deaths or other serious adverse events, other significant adverse events that are judged to be of special interest because of their clinical importance. Again, these would be adverse events of special interest, and these typically include events leading to discontinuation, but may also include other important events defined by the sponsor as just discussed above. Adverse events that were clearly unrelated to the IND product may be omitted or described very briefly. Now, narratives that are written for some key SAEs can be placed either in the text of the report of the CSR under Section 12.3.2 or in Section 14.3.3, Narratives of Deaths. Typically, the safety narratives are placed in Section 14.3.3 if there are 10 or more. CSR Section 14 is considered the post-text part of the CSR report, with summary tables of safety and efficacy, figures, narratives, and other information relevant to the CSR. Then Section 12.3.3, Analysis and Discussion of Deaths, Other Serious Adverse Events, and Other Significant AEs, is really similar in focus to Section 12.2.3, Analysis of Adverse Events. Section 12.3.3 discusses patient deaths, serious adverse events leading to discontinuation, and other significant adverse events. The discussion includes, but is not limited to, a comparison of the treatment groups, the relationship of the adverse events to study drug, whether there were any dose-related trends in type or frequency of these events, and any other safety-related trends, that is, any safety signals and trends that were surmised or identified. This is an example from a clinical study report of an in-text table that is typically included in section 12.2.2, display of adverse events. In-text table means it's embedded within the clinical study report discussion. Now, as I said, this AE table displays the most frequently occurring adverse events for discussion in the text. In section 12.2.2, in-text tables displaying adverse events by system organ class as is recommended in ICH E3, and also the preferred coded term, and this is MEDRA coding, can be very lengthy, very long tables. Typically, what happens is that the clinical team from the sponsor decides whether a cutoff should be used to present the most relevant safety data. Some examples of cutoff criteria are adverse events occurring in 2 or more subjects, or those with 5% or greater incidence overall, or those AEs with 2% or greater incidence in the active treatment group. ICH E3 provides a suggested cutoff of greater than or equal to 1% criterion. However, the cutoff criteria is really a study-dependent decision where the team must use their judgment. This is discussed further in the article by Linda Donini in your readings for this week. Regarding cutoffs, even when using cutoff criteria to present the most relevant safety data in a table, there may be a good rationale for the most frequent events discussed in the text to be referring to a higher level cutoff, and this is certainly acceptable. And for example, the table that's shown by the discussion may show a 5% or greater incidence, but your most frequent events presented and discussed in the text may be of a 10% or greater incidence. Again, these cutoffs should be discussed with the sponsor's clinical team. As noted in the most recent ICH E3 Q&A guideline addendum, the CSR contains the most relevant information to elucidate the safety and efficacy data and results. Depending on the number as well as the clinical importance of the adverse events, displaying AEs by severity or by investigator-assessed relationship to study drug may not always be necessary to present in in-text tables. Now, relating back to the discussion on section 12.3.2, narratives of deaths, other serious adverse events, and certain other significant adverse events, here's an example of a subject narrative, sometimes also called safety narrative, for a serious or significant adverse event that required hospitalization. The required elements listed below are from ICH E3, and you should check this to make sure that this narrative was complete. Each narrative should include the nature and intensity of the event, the clinical course leading up to the event with an indication of the timing of the adverse event relative to test drug or investigational product administration, relevant laboratory measures, whether the drug was stopped and if so when, countermeasures, how was the event treated, post-mortem findings, unfortunately if it is a death, and the investigator's opinion on causality, and sponsor's opinion on causality, if both appropriate. In addition, the following information should also be included in all narratives: a patient identifier, the age and sex of the patient, the general clinical condition of the patient, if appropriate, the disease being treated, and with duration of the illness, relevant con-meds or previous illnesses with details of occurrence and duration, relevant concomitant and previous medications with details of dosage, the test drug or the investigational product administered, drug dose, if this varied among patients, and the length of time administered. Now we'll move forward again, continuing on the safety sections in a CSR. We're now to section 12.4, clinical laboratory evaluation. This is where many sponsors present this data by reorganizing the entire section by laboratory parameter type. For example, presenting all hematology, all serum chemistry, the urinalysis, or any other labs. Most ICH elements are still addressed, but just in a different order. The presentation of these in-text tables on lab data and the interpretation are agreed upon by the clinical team as to what data are really clinically relevant, as this data can also be very lengthy. For some studies, such as if you're developing a combination drug diagnostic and you're doing those types of studies, in that case, in that particular CSR, the diagnostic laboratory data would be very important and would warrant tabular presentations and discussion in the text. 12.4.1 Listing of individual laboratory measurements cross-references to the CSR location of laboratory data listings. 12.4.2.1 Laboratory values over time discusses the mean change in laboratory values from baseline over time, noting any trends, dose or time relationships, and differences between treatment group. 12.4.2.2 Individual patient changes may present shift tables or graphs, which allow the number of subjects who move from normal, low, or high lab values at baseline to normal, low, or high values at other time points during the study, based on the laboratory normal reference ranges also provided. 12.4.2.3 Individually clinically significant abnormalities discusses individual patients' data with marked abnormalities or adverse events related to laboratory measurements. The discussion may include an in-text table or listing or brief narratives on subjects, also the results of an analysis of the possible relationship of abnormalities to the study drug or other factors, such as concomitant medications taken, may also be included. And the last section here is 12.5, Vital Signs, Physical Findings, and Other Observations Related to Safety. ICH E3 states these data should be presented similarly to lab data. Abnormal findings in the physical exam after start of the study drug, of course, are typically reported as adverse events. In such cases, a brief statement to this effect can be made, and these data are not identified separately here. Other observations is a catch-all category and usually includes ECG results and any other safety data that do not otherwise fall into the category of adverse events, vital signs, and laboratory data. This is the last slide discussing the clinical study report. Section 12.6 Safety conclusions are similar to efficacy conclusions in the CSR in that safety conclusions are usually presented as a bulleted list and should be copied verbatim to the CSR synopsis, as are the efficacy conclusions. During a sponsor's clinical program, again, the multidisciplinary development team, upon which clinical is a key member, carefully evaluates the clinical program, regulatory requirements, and commercial considerations to develop the new product's key messages, which we touched upon last week. The key messages relate to efficacy and safety messaging for the new product. Safety messaging is a key consideration when writing the conclusions of the CSR. All CSRs that support a marketing application should present safety conclusions in a somewhat similar manner to facilitate both the writing of the safety information and the regulatory review. The key messages are also typically integrated as appropriate and relevant in the last written section in the clinical safety report, Section 13, Discussion and Overall Conclusions. However, this is not the end of the CSR. The appendices follow, where all the detail is actually provided, including each patient's listings, as I mentioned at the beginning. Appendices are typically much larger than the text portion of the CSR. One CSR may easily be the equivalent of 5 or 6 regulatory binders, and which are of 2-inch width. So I suggest you scan the ICH E3 guidance to review what goes in which appendix. And that's found under the readings. We spent a few minutes reviewing what is presented in a CSR, as these are the building blocks of the marketing application. Each study contributes to the safety database and product profile. As you review the different sections on safety, you see some of the elements that comprise the safety profile, actually. Now we turn to the marketing application, and we'll discuss one key document related to safety risks, and it is the Integrated Summary of Safety. And this presents all of the safety data that is from studies submitted in the marketing application. The ISS presents safety results from all Phase 2 and 3 well-controlled double-blind trials, from all open-label Phase 2 and 3 trials. The safety data is presented separately from controlled trials. The Phase 1 safety data is provided separately, and the Phase 1 safety data in studies where patients were dosed versus healthy volunteers are also separated. The sponsor must complete several activities when preparing for and creating the ISS, which is the Integrated Summary of Safety, and that's how I'll refer to it from here on in. So the sponsor must decide which studies can be pooled to aggregate safety data, and then that would allow performing one or more meta-analyses, providing a more comprehensive safety evaluation across several studies to make a larger population. In addition, the sponsor must decide on the types of statistical analyses to be conducted and the types of data displays, tabular formats, to be included in the ISS. The use of meta-analysis is discussed in the FDA guidance on integrated summaries, and typically one or more meta-analyses are incorporated into the ISS to evaluate a larger effect size on specifically chosen adverse events. There is not a guidance specific to ISS, it's ISE and ISS, and it's in your readings. In addition, the key messages for the marketing application are reviewed to decide which messages should be included in the ISS when appropriate, similar to what was done for each CSR. The sponsor spends much effort on the ISS because it presents all safety data across all clinical studies. It's basically representing the whole safety database. So now we turn to the FDA Advisory Committee, which is the last discussion for this week, as you are going to be evaluating and actually deconstructing the safety information presented at an FDA Advisory Committee meeting and for your second assignment. During FDA's review of an investigational new product, FDA will sometimes request an FDA Advisory Committee be convened for evaluating a marketing application for an investigational new product. If the product is first in class and or has some significant safety concerns, and or if FDA has some significant concerns, and or whether the safety or efficacy and or the benefit risk analysis and decision making may be somewhat controversial. An FDA Advisory Committee meeting is a public forum. The FDA Advisory Committee panel for evaluating the benefit is convened to evaluate the benefits and risks of investigational products. There is a chair who convenes the meeting and is responsible for making sure that all members have the opportunity to ask questions and vote to recommend approval or non-approval of the investigational product. A typical drugs advisory committee includes 15 to 17 members. There are also 2 members who represent the industry's interests, that's the pharmaceutical industry's interests, and as such are not voting or non-voting. There are also up to 2 members who represent consumer interests and can vote. These meetings are open to the public, so if you have the opportunity to be in the DC metro area and can attend one of these all-day meetings, it's a great way to examine how efficacy and safety data are explored and presented to assess benefit risk for a new product. And I recommend you do that. An FDA Advisory Committee meeting is typically an all-day meeting. The sponsor is asked to present an overview of the efficacy and safety data, highlighting key information. This is the sponsor's opportunity to present and defend the benefit-risk analysis performed and explain why the sponsor believes this investigational new product should be approved. This is also the opportunity for the sponsor to explain the safety profile of the drug, explaining how the drug may compare to competitors in the marketplace, or if it's first in class, explain the mechanism of action and the efficacy as well as the safety. In addition, FDA presents their thinking of the new product and, if applicable, raises their concerns. For assignment 2, you are examining a first-in-class product, Nucala, developed by GlaxoSmithKline for the treatment of severe asthma. You have the opportunity to view GSK's safety database for this product that GSK submitted in their marketing application, which was a biologics license application since Nucala is a humanized monoclonal antibody. And this safety database was used to establish enough safety data to support marketing approval. As you can imagine, the transcript of an advisory committee is quite lengthy, as are some of the briefing documents. We've examined all of these FDA advisory committee documents and provided them to you, but we point out the pages that you need to read in order to successfully complete this assignment. But if you have time, feel free to read some additional discussions as well related in some of these briefing documents. This product, Nucala, was launched in 2015. So, what should you get out of this week? What types of safety risk data are presented and discussed in the clinical study report? Why are cutoff percentages used to present and analyze safety risk information? How is safety risk data organized and displayed in the ISS for a marketing application? What types of safety risk data are discussed at an FDA advisory committee? And things to think about. As you go through the readings and interact with your fellow students, think about what safety information does the sponsor provide in the integrated summary of safety to support the adequacy of the safety database for their marketing application. What safety risk data are used to draft the safety risk sections in the draft prescribing information for the marketing application? What types of information does the sponsor provide and present to an FDA advisory committee? What safety risks does the FDA Advisory Committee focus on during an FDA Advisory Committee meeting? Thank you, and that's it.